Well, welcome back. A very busy morning this morning, and now we're just waiting for Dr. Mark Maybe, Professor Maybe, to join us so that we can have a chat about education, where it's going, how it's changing, and some of the implications for Lewis. And so he's, he's got the link. I'm sure he'll be with us in a minute or two. Uh, we are, just so you know, changing the format a little so that we can actually punch heavier on several days. On Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we are now live, and a very strong lineup we've got on each of those 3 days. And then we replay. Uh, uh, we play Monday on a Tuesday. We play Wednesday on a Thursday, and Friday on a Saturday. Guess what? As if by magic, here he is, Dr. Mark Maybe.
Keith.
How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you, Keith? A bit blowy up here today, a bit on the windy side.
It's cold down here.
Cold.
Cold. Yes. Anyway, sorry that we kept you waiting, but we had an interesting former Jerusalem Post journalist on to talk about what was happening in the Middle East. I was talking to somebody the other day, and we were talking about how sort of youngsters sometimes are a bit out of touch with academia, and I was telling him how you show a pen and a fob watch and a lovely clock behind you and so on to show what these things were like, because they have no inkling, never experienced them.
No, absolutely. It is a matter. I think I told you last week about the young lad that I talked to that had never seen a fountain pen. Well, I asked all the kids. There were 30 in the class, and none of them, not one single kid, had seen a fountain pen. I know it's old school, but it's not. So I always show it, Keith. My normal, good old fountain pen. It's
absolutely, yeah.
Life's about, isn't it, Keith?
Yeah. Strangely enough, I had on 2 or 3 months ago now, but he lives in Lewis, the former MD of Parker Pen.
Oh, right, excellent. Wow. Yeah. Parker Pens, they were the sort of Rolls Royce, weren't they?
Weren't they? Indeed. And they were based in New Haven.
Yes, I've got one of these sort of posh Mont Blanc. My treat to myself, as I sort of went to semi-retirement, was to buy myself one of these rather nice, stylish Mont Blanc pens. So that was my present to myself. But people look at me gone out. What are you using that for? Now, Keith, you can even that someone sent me a document to sign, and they asked me to sign it on the screen.
Yes, I know.
So I said to them, "Where's the pen?"
It doesn't look a bit like anybody's signature.
No, it doesn't look anything like mine, because you do it with your fingernail, don't you? So you can hardly do a proper signature. But
yes.
There you go.
I can actually remember, I was quite a young boy, but I can remember when biros or ballpoint pens first became popular, and it was said that this would ruin handwriting.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's interesting because my handwriting is not very good. And one of the reasons that I used to use a fountain pen, because you can't write quickly with it. You've got to sort of write fairly slowly. Yeah, and now with a biro you can sort of scribble, but with a fountain pen you can't scribble. You've got to write.
You have to write properly,
sort of way, which I think educationally, I think that I know it's proper old school, but it wouldn't do a lot of kids any harm to do that. And I wonder whether in 20 years' time, Keith, whether kids will even be able to write.
I wonder, Mark. I mean, you know how my mind works is in weird and wonderful ways. But I wonder with your new university whether it would be worthwhile just setting up and replicating an old classroom and let them all just have, even if they had an hour in it, to see what things are like. I think it would be rather interesting, wouldn't it? Perhaps we could find a sponsor for that.
I think it'd be really good. I'd also thought that, no doubt when I was at school, Keith, you did technical drawing. Now it's all on computer, but actually it wouldn't do any harm to bring back those big drawing boards and get people to actually use their skills and draw
Yes.
rather than using all this CAD CAM stuff, which is fantastic. But if they actually did it and draw first and then put it onto CAD CAM. I know
Yes.
certainly. I had an interesting experience. I visited last week an organisation called the British Academy for Jewellery, and that's based in the jewellery culture of Birmingham, and they had proper old school craft workshops with little benches with copper and brass and gold and so on. And they were actually doing proper jewellery. But when I went to another class, they were in their early 20s. They were actually doing designs, but by hand. And I said to the guy, this is fantastic to see young people designing things on paper rather than getting computers to do it for them. And he was saying, in things like jewelry, you can get computers to do it, but actually transposing a drawing into some metal is actually much easier to do than you can't really transpose a computer into brass or copper. But yeah, I think it's really important.
Perhaps what I'll do is put out an appeal for a sponsor so that we can build a little old style classroom, perhaps with inkwells as well as the old desk, and we could make that a focal point of this program.
I think it would be because it's interesting, isn't it? Because it's called the School of Innovation. But actually, if you think about things as you rightly said, moving from this thing here, then through to I've actually got like another one. I've got a one that's a ball pen, and it used to turn the bottom and the pen would come out. And that was sort of in its time, Keith. That was innovation, wasn't it?
Indeed, it was.
So you turned it like that, and the nib came out, and then you turned it, and that was innovation.
And I always think that when we look at innovation now, that it should be put in the context of what was in the past. You may be interested to know is a friend of mine. In fact, he was my old boss at Reuters. Is trying to raise. It's quite a lot of money, but apparently scientists are as concerned about sound pollution as air pollution. And in fact, they say that sound pollution is more dangerous than air pollution. And he wants to build a theme park, so that the funds can support their research. And you go into a chamber as it would have been in the time of the dinosaurs. And then you move until you come out in the last chamber is what it would be like walking out of, say, the underground station at Piccadilly Circus with all the cacophony of noise.
Amazing.
And I think that this business of contrast is so important. It's so important.
I think so. Well, it's interesting. I've been a member of my dad was in the military, and I belong to a club called the Victory Services Club, based in Marble.
You've taken me there.
I've been there. You've been there, Keith. And the really lovely thing about the Victory Services Club is that they don't allow mobile phones, in the bar area. And I was there last week, and there was a guy on his mobile phone. I'm a really polite sort of person. I don't normally go up to him, but I actually went up to him and said, please don't, if you want to use your phone outside, because there's no music, there's no mobile phones, and it's beautiful. And sometimes they're on my own, and you can just have a drink, and there's not people jabbering on a mobile phone or music blaring. I sound real old fart now, don't I? But music blaring.
On the contrary, more and more people are talking this way.
Yeah,
they begin to realise that after all the hype about where we're going with computers and so on and so forth, is that if we actually forget things along the way, is actually it draws people back.
Yeah.
They're using computers as at half speed, if you like,
Yeah.
because they don't appreciate some of the things that, for instance, no mobile phones.
Yeah.
I mean, in your game, or let me say our game, is there is nothing worse than holding a seminar or a lecture or whatever, and everybody's going like this under the desk.
Mm.
Actually listening is becoming a lost art. So
Mm.
anything to make sure that people listen, and for that matter, talk,
Mm.
is a positive in my view.
I think I maybe said this to you last week, Keith. I went to an Italian restaurant a week or so ago, and there were a young couple sitting sort of opposite me, and they're in their early 20s, and I was in there for nearly 2 hours, and they didn't talk to each other once.
Yeah.
They were on their mobile phones all the time, and I said to the person I was with, "Do you think they're saying, 'Do you want a coffee? Shall we have dessert?'" Because they didn't speak, and I was sort of enthralled that you could go to a restaurant and not talk, and that's the
Yeah.
great thing about the VC club.
Conversation, yes. Food is secondary.
Yeah, yeah, I think you prove it with this great television program you do, Keith. It's all about people and communication skills. And I remember, when you were teaching at London College, you talking about the importance of sort of enhancing your communication skills, both verbally but also written. And I think if I'm not sure that when you're writing things, it's sort of up here, isn't it? Really.
Yes,
But
that's
now
right.
you just get this thing out, don't you, and type in what you want.
Yeah.
But actually, the imagination. And I did think I didn't, but I felt like saying to these young couple, put your bloody phones away, have a chat,
Yes.
because you'll get much more from bloody chatting than on your phones. But it's really, and I think that's one of the things that I want to bring into the School of Innovation. Is it's not all about high tech. It's about seeing how innovation has
Yes.
developed, and it's really important. I often show I collect pocket watches, and
Yes.
I show people the insides of these pocket watches, and I've got one on now, Keith, and they're just amazing inside. I don't know whether I've seen it on there, but the sort of that's technology.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's
Just
a beauty too.
unbelievable.
That is just beautiful. Where did you get
Yeah,
that?
I had that from my grandfather. It's about 100. It's about 120 years old, and it keeps perfect time, Keith. And you do something called winding it up. So it's
Yes.
got the battery. You wind the thing up, and
Yeah.
and
I think
but
it's called the Hunter, is it not? Is it
yeah,
called the Hunter? Yes.
yes, it is. Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
They have lots of different, but I think that everyone's so used to technology now. And when people see me and they say, "Oh, that's very smart," and I say, "I don't have a watch," and they say, "What do you use?" And I say, "Well, I use this thing. It does as good, and it keeps time
Yeah.
to the minute, and I just wind it every day."
Yeah.
But it's an interesting concept that particularly young people don't even get shown in schools now. So it's not.
No. No. Well, all the more reason for us to try to replicate just a small classroom.
Yeah,
Then you can you could deliver little lessons in this classroom, Mark, and you can put
yeah,
on your gown,
yes,
which
absolutely. Can wear my
is
gown and my
yes,
mortarboard and
absolutely. I mean,
look very.
all
Yeah.
my masters at school wore gowns. Yeah, in fact, I wore
Yes,
a gown myself for a little while. Yeah,
did it? Yeah, yeah. It's very yes. It's very very smart. But it's a bit. I thought back to sort of days when I was at school, and things that were no value to me whatsoever were things like learning algebra or Pythagoras theorem and all this sort of thing. I never used that. The only thing in maths I really use is percentages, etc. But the other thing that I noticed, I told you about this little school I'm governor of, that I used to be. We were taught sewing, and we were boys and girls sewing and domestic science. It was called cooking, and they don't do any of that now.
No, no.
And I think it's much more value knowing how to. Oh, you're bleeping. It's much more important knowing how to cook something than Pythagoras theorem. I think, but
2 pi r.
Yeah, 2 pi r. Yeah. What's that all about? What use is that?
Exactly.
Meat and potatoes. That meat and potato pie times 2 is good.
Yeah. Well, actually, strangely enough, a couple of years or so ago, I approached a chef who had, actually, he approached us, had written a book, and he wanted to see if we could televise it, and we looked very seriously at it. But he did simple things like scrambled eggs and sort of baked potatoes. And he said his biggest demand for this book was from young girls who had just got married and they'd never been taught to cook.
No.
A mother-in-law was coming who came from an age to cook, and they needed to be able to cook something. And so that they actually went to this chef to find out how to cook simple meals.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And a lot of it's just basic stuff, isn't it? But because they that's not part of the national curriculum now, so they don't do. As is in when I didn't really, to be honest with you, I did pick quite a bit of it up, but until I went off to university, then you had to cook, because if you didn't cook, you couldn't eat, you didn't live. So it's just, I think, bringing back some of these older, more traditional subject areas.
Yes.
Are not going back in time, but actually, I think they could take us further forward.
Yes. It reminds me of that scene with Sidney Poitier, whom I was a great fan of his acting. But in To Sir with Love, he teaches his students, when you haven't got much money and you need to eat, this is what you do.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yes, absolutely. I think.
No, go on.
No, I think all that's lost, and I think we should bring that back again. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, as I sent you a little text in the week, and I have to send to you via email the way to get in touch with our councillor here. She is both district council. A district covers about 100,000 people, and town council, which covers 17,000 people. Janet Barr, Councillor Janet Barr, she is the leader in education here. She is a fascinating lady, because she came to Britain from Ghana when she was about 11 or 12. And as she says, where else in the world could a lady from Ghana become mayor of a relatively important town like Lewis? But she did.
Brilliant.
She's a delightful lady. She's a real go-getter. You and she will get along famously together. But she is very interested in chatting to you about, and let's explain to those people who are new to this, because we discussed this last week. You are part of a team leading the development of a university without lecture halls. Explain that.
Okay, so we came up with the concept that wouldn't it be good to have something that is different. There haven't been many new universities since the 1960s. Warwick University was one of the last universities to be a university. There have been a couple of new universities. The Dyson, he set up a university in London, but we thought that it would be really good to set up something different. So I've been working with two young guys. They've been funded via a venture capitalist to set up a new type of university, but something radical, something that doesn't involve people sitting in lecture theatres with 250 seats, but actually very much work-based, very much project-based, having speakers coming in, but not actually talking to massive numbers, but actually running little workshops, running very practical sessions, and for the students that are on the program, that they'll go out and spend a fair period of time out in industry themselves, developing skills, but also developing employability skills, and the sort of thing we've just talked about, communication skills. Often just sitting in a lecture theatre, it's great, you can absorb lots of information, but there are different ways of doing that now. So we wanted to set something up that was very different. The two young guys that are working on the project asked me to join them as an old man to help them with that, which I've been doing for about 6 months now. They've raised nearly £1 million, and that means that we can sort of start to move forward with putting together the application for a university, and it will be very different. I think I explained to you before, that we're thinking of setting up a hub in Manchester,
Yep.
but then having spokes in different parts of the country. One thing I'd really love to do is to have a spoke down in Lewes, where
I'm very anxious, and I'm pushing hard for the first spoke to be Lewes.
Right.
I think it's such an important development, and we've got a lot to offer here, I think. So I hope that you and Janet can actually get something going between you. I rather think, and I don't know whether you found it already, that academia as such will probably be a bit resistant to this. But I think that it's so important to get back to what was a good apprenticeship scheme in the past.
And I think it's bridging the gap. It's bridging that sort of traditional apprenticeship. But probably going back 50 years, where people used to study. The thing we're thinking is that we need to fit in with people's working life. So we'd do things, the old-fashioned evening classes, and Saturdays and Sundays. So they might do 2 evenings a week, which they might even do online. They would come in, work in little groups, and then a Saturday or Sunday when they would come in. And I think it's it's not exactly revolutionary, but it's sort of it's sort of going back to the sort of things we've just been talking about, Keith. Perhaps a bit more traditional, but not chalk and talk, but people actually doing things and having live projects they work on, and then they report back. They go back out into industry or into journalism or whatever, and they come back in and they teach their fellow students. They go in and say, "This week I work with Keith Hayes on Mirador TV."
And you're going to get one of these young chaps, or both of them, on, aren't you?
Yes, I'm going to. They're always so busy. Typical young people, also busy on different things. But I will get a young guy called Will Hill, who's the guy who's heading up, perhaps to come on next week, Keith, if it's all right with you.
Excellent.
And he can explain in a bit more detail what they're planning.
Is behind me, just coming, is our next correspondent. Is a gentleman called John Henty. And John, actually, in a different sort of way, follows what you and I are talking about, because John is as long in the tooth as I am, and actually started Radio Brighton. But he is a great proponent of Max Miller, comedian.
Fantastic.
And he explains how what Max Miller did 50 years ago has influenced today's comedians and helped develop and so on, and put it into context.
Amazing.
What he does and says is very interesting, but it also sort of fits in with the theme that you and I have talked about. You can't do anything unless you've got things in context, and it's a good theme. And I mean, there we are. Perhaps this new university can have something for comedians.
Yeah, well, perhaps we can invite John in as an honorary professor to come and talk to the students about things.
I'm sure he would do it. Actually, he is great at going around this part of the country anyway, and lecturing about all sorts of things. The other gentleman that he was very helped promote was the author of The Snowman, Raymond Briggs.
Oh, right, yeah.
Wow. So he's a fascinating character, John, and he's all over the place. So we title his program "Plenty of Henty."
I've heard him a couple of times when I've tuned in, and really interesting guy. And I think, Keith, you're very modest, but one of your great skills is you manage to bring so many characters in, and I think that's one of the great things I like about Mirador TV, that you filled it with your barristers and people like Suzanne and others that come in, and they're proper characters. And
there aren't many ordinary people, are there?
No, that's what life's about, having a laugh and fun. So it's great. So,
Mark, I will send Janet's details to you, and I see that you're now talking to Suzanne.
Yeah, and we'll hopefully get something together for next week.
Oh, excellent!
Yes. So
things are motoring on, but you talk about characters, and I mean, you're one of the most unusual educators that I've ever come across. So I'm glad that we've got you here, and I must say, I always enjoyed the time that I worked with you.
Yeah, me too, Keith. It was great times. I often, like you you look back on times, and I think, actually those times in Notting Hill Gate when you and I went for a glass of wine down the local pub and chewed things over. We got more done doing that than we did in lots of ways. Really, it was great, and it was a start of a lifelong friendship that we now have, which is wonderful.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Apart from which, you deliver delicious eggs.
Yes. I hope to see you very soon, so I can bring you some eggs over.
Yes. Well, I think we must now work seriously on that meeting in London.
Yeah, that'd be lovely, Keith. Yeah, great.
All right. But if we don't talk to you in between time, we'll see you next week.
Great. Yes. Good wishes to you and all your viewers.
Thanks, Mark.
Cheers, Keith. Take it easy.
All right. That's a Mark Maybe, a character in education, and it will bring all sorts of exciting things to Mirador, and perhaps exciting things to Lewis, particularly if he can persuade our powers that be to join him in his university project. It's Mr. Henty. Would you like to come and join me?
So this is it, is it?
It is.
Well,
this is where it happens.
Oh, lovely to see. It must be Wednesday.
Yes, it is.
Oh,
and we've just been talking. You
I
probably
heard you
in the background.
I heard it.
Talking about you, and there you see the nice thing is that you've got a fan there that well, you've got lots of fans, but a fan of one of our correspondents in Stoke-on-Trent.
Good grief of potteries.
Absolutely.
I could have told him about Mabel Lucy Atwell, whose pottery was very much up there.
Well, he just said that he would like to get you as a guest lecturer on his project. So you'll have lots of opportunity to include Lucy.
Lucy. Yes. I love Lucy.
Yeah. And Desi Arnaz.
I know, Lucille Ball
and Desi Arnaz.
I love those people. And then later on, of course, there was the Joan Rivers, I think, the amazing Joan Rivers. Outrageous lady. But again, all part of the same syndrome, really.
Yeah.
In other words, individuals, characters, and getting across comedy, but in a really strong forceful way, which is what it's all about, as we've discussed on many occasions.
Absolutely.
So good to see you, Keith.
And good to see you. Can I just say before we start with, because you've always got fascinating stuff, I don't want to interrupt this, that I have now broached to a councillor that the secret garden is scruffy, that nobody seems to be doing anything about it, that we've actually got a plan in place, and she has promised to get us together with the council to see whether they'll allow us to.
I hope so. We both hope so, and it really wouldn't take an awful lot to be done, and it wouldn't cost a lot of money either.
And we've already got a gardener in place.
Absolutely. There are others, I'm sure, who would leap at the chance, because it was a delight, and it was rather sad that, in a way, only Stephen really seemed to care for it in the way that he did. And that's why it's got to continue, and in continuing, we can remember the one man.
Absolutely.
Which is entirely right. Well, what was...
I mean, it's a real inheritance from Stephen. And we mustn't fumble the ball.
No, I couldn't agree more. And you may have noticed there was an item in the Sussex Express last week, actually, which did mention the little campaign. And I think there was comment from a former mayor, Councillor Barr, and she said it was a brilliant idea. I mean, I'm not going to argue with that. It's an obviously good idea. And she hopes to carry it forward. So we are hopeful, and we'll keep people informed.
That's great.
Absolutely.
That's excellent.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Especially at a grim time, we need to be growing things.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
And I would hope that you will lend your weight to this new university which Mark is starting, because he wants the first spoke to be in Lewis. And I would love that. And it's the sort of thing, for instance, we were just talking about finding a sponsor and building a mock old classroom where you had an inkwell and even a fountain pen.
Good idea.
He said students nowadays don't know what a fountain pen is.
No. And a little the desk used to open, and you used to keep things in there.
That's right.
Absolutely. And also, if you were really naughty, we'd actually carve your name.
That's right.
I did that. And I also went to a school in Croydon during the war, this was, and there was a brick wall there. And the number of people who'd used pennies, the old pennies, to little holes in the brick wall. It's still there. That wall is still there, and so are the pennies. But that's history and what children did in those days.
Right.
In the days when you could buy sticks of licorice, for example. I know that, and you used to play marbles. Entirely right. Now we have world championships marbles, and in fact, there's a marble championship, I think, in Lewis from time to time.
Yes, there is. Yes,
I think up at the local pub as well.
Now, the other thing, which some of the die-hard, you cannot do this, people try to stop, is conkers.
Oh, yes.
And I said the other day, is I came in on my little scooter, and it was frosty and it was cold, and my nose was cold and so on. But I said, autumn has arrived.
Yes.
At long last, we've got the season back.
Yes.
And conkers were very much part of the autumn.
Completely right. And also very good for preventing spiders. There is a theory that if you have conkers in your room, that the spiders will avoid it. I think that's probably nonsense. I've never really discussed it with a spider, to be honest with you, but I would think they would probably dismiss it.
Yes.
Because they're intelligent creatures.
Yes. I mean, that's why they won't talk to us about it.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, people wonder why spiders are silent. Just as well they are silent. I mean, if they were going around like that and making noises, it would be quite worrying, wouldn't it?
Yes.
I don't know what sort of a noise. How did we get onto spiders?
I don't know, but a spider must be a journalist because they spin things, don't they?
I think so too. And eight legs, of course, which is quite useful, I suppose. Mind you, I have enough trouble with two. And listen...
now, away you go. It's your show.
Oh, yes. Well, I haven't got a lot to say. You did mention, obviously, Max Miller. We're pleased about that. And I bought the local paper, which is full of pretty bad news, I'm afraid. But let's have a look what I have got in here. Because one thing we do like...
bag.
Yes,
put the bag up in front of the camera so people can see the famous bag.
This is the famous bag.
Right, yes.
There it is. Oh, look at that. You see, there we are.
Yeah, sausages, yes.
A few extra pounds of pork and beef, probably. Wonderful sausages. But no, I've got in here, you mentioned a little bit of history of Max Miller. And we don't want to go on too much about Max Miller, but basically, there was an article which I brought with me today, which appeared in our magazine, which is called There'll Never Be Another, because that's what he always said. There'll never be another lady, there'll never be another. Now listen, now there's a funny thing. Here, I went home the other night, Max Miller. Okay, so there'll never be another. And this was when a cartoonist, I always admire cartoonists' work, especially if they're good, and this one was. And he did the whole Max Miller story in cartoon form. So, I mean, we won't go through it today, but I thought we might just mention the fact. A lot of people say, well, when was he born? Well, the answer is he was born on November the 21st, so we're coming up to his birthday, in 1894. His name was Thomas Henry Sargent. We've established that before. And he married a lady who thought that that was not a very commercial name to go on the halls, ladies and gentlemen. Thomas Sargent. No, doesn't sound good. Max Miller, hard to say really, except that he developed this cheeky persona, and she thought, well, cheeky chappy, and that really caught on in a big way, and it became Max Miller. How it was Miller, we don't know, but I respect anybody called Miller. I know a man, a marvelous man, and this goes back to the days when everybody had surnames, not surnames, they had their own names. I mean, I was known as Chunky. I was known as Chunky. That was, which you didn't call people fatty, or you preferred not to. But I was quite chunky, so they called me Chunky. You see, and obviously this is Max was known as the Cheeky Chappy. It's the same sort of thing. You see, absolutely. So he was born in Brighton. I think we've established that very clearly. To quite an impoverished family. That's something else that needs to drum home. In fact, there were 5 children in the family, and they frequently going hungry because times were very tight around that part of the century, 1894 coming up to 1900, and had to move house fairly frequently because they couldn't pay the rent. So we often get people saying, you know, I think Max Miller actually lived in this house. And we've said many times, he probably did. and then for about 4 weeks and then moved on. At one time, they say he actually slept under the West Pier. Who would know? It was at least dry under there, I suppose. So he started doing that. He tried to make some money, as a young lad would do, helping out various things. He used to sell golf balls. I think I've mentioned that before.
You have, yes.
He used to
again, won't hurt.
Yes, he was a caddy, you see. He often offered his services as a caddy, and he kept a pretty sly open for anything that, if the ball went missing and they couldn't find it, he remembered probably where it was. And so at night afterwards, he'd be around there picking up all his gold, and then he'd flog them back, sell them back to people. So a little bit of an entrepreneurial spirit. And then he entered the war, because it was obviously the First World War at that time, and served in Mesopotamia, funnily enough. A lot of people don't realize that. He served in Mesopotamia, and he did join a sort of concert party. You know how they used to have army concert parties, Ensa and all the rest of it. Exactly, Adolf Hartmann, yes. And so that really got him on the stage as such. And when he came back to Brighton, it was a pretty obvious move. Brighton, after the war, of course, around 1917, 18, was beginning to revive a little, and they needed entertaining and happiness. So the Palace Pier, for example, the West Pier, for example, and along the seafront, there were 2 little concert parties, and he was part of those, which was lovely. And he would travel between both of them on a bicycle, and later even rang a little song called Let's Have a Ride on Your Bicycle. Right. Let's have a ride on your bicycle. Let's have a ride on your bike. It was a rude song, needless to say, and we won't go down that particular.
Where did he get his trousers from?
Well, that was good. You see, golf. You see, everybody, as you know, golfers, because they don't want to sort of trip over the trouser ends, they would tuck them in, and so they were +4s. And so all these people, and he must have caught on with him. So it is a good question. I mean, why on earth come around looking like we're wearing +4s, except it brought attention to him. And then he wore the most garish stuff, as we all know. I mean, you and I are fairly modest compared. But Max wore the most amazing stuff, and it made an impact. And as I've often said, talking again to the way that Max's tradition carries on, people like Ken Dodd in particular, all ended up with a tickling stick, and they wore the most amazing stuff when they came on stage, and immediately made an impact. It's no good just going on there and saying, hello, everybody, here I am. Not funny at all. Come on, with a bit of a build-up too. There was a signature tune. He had the signature. And the thing about Max too was he was a shrewd character. He didn't immediately rush on. The orchestra in the pit there would say, it's time for Max. They'd start, and nobody knew what was coming. And they were waiting for it. And then he'd wait, and then he'd emerge. And he'd wear all this gear, and immediately they're laughing and cheering. And well, it went on from there for years and years and years, as we know. The only thing that he didn't do a lot of was radio. And the reason, again, I think we've mentioned this, was simply because he was unscripted. Max Miller was by and large unscripted. In those days, in the 30s and the 40s, the BBC in particular, it was only the BBC, they insisted that there was a script. So you had to submit, even when he was on workers' playtime, which was during the war, he had to sort of submit the jokes that he was going to tell. And of course, that was always a bit dodgy, although very often he would submit the jokes and they would say, yes, that's all right, Mr. Miller. Yes, that's all right. That's all right. And then he'd come on there, and it was the way he told them too, which reminds me of one quick little joke, which was mentioned to me only yesterday by one of my Max Miller colleagues. It was in, I may have mentioned this before, but it was in Lewis Prison. And this bloke had inside knowledge about this. Apparently, sadly, they're all confined to their cells for great lengths of time, which is bad. We would agree with that, is bad. And so to alleviate the boredom and unable to communicate, they had a little system that when they did meet for about an hour, they had a list. They compiled a list of jokes, you see, about 30 jokes, you see. And they handed everybody in their cells one of these lists of jokes, you see. And then in the middle of this is not entirely untrue story. In the middle of the night, when they're all sort of tucked away in their cells, one of them would say, he'd look at his list and he'd say, I like that number 17 joke. So he'd go, number 17. And immediately throughout the jail, there would be enormous laughter. People were rolling around this. So then a little later on, 12. Number 12, that's even funnier, you see. So lots of laughter. Now, a bloke who'd never been in prison before, fortunately, he saw this and he thought, that is amazing, but I just don't understand what it's all about. He said, people shout these numbers out. And the other man said, well, look, there's a list of these jokes. You can have this list, and you try it tonight. You try it tonight. Thought, whoa, worth a try, isn't it? So, dead of night, they're all in their cells. 14, someone shouts. Roars of laughter. 1. Whoa, not 1. Oh, not that one. We love that one. They laughed and laughed and laughed. Our friend who newly arrived in the prison thought, I'll try this. I'll try number 9. All right. Number 9. Complete silence. You say, it's funny. Number 9. Not a word. So the next morning, when they were relaxing, etc., he said to the other man, he said, it's a good scheme. He said, but it doesn't work. He said, all this laughter. He said, I shout out a number. He said, and there wasn't one titter, not a titter. Why is that? The bloke said, it's the way you told it. It's the way you told it, you said. Number 9, not funny. 9, very funny. So there we are.
Actually, you have spoken about Max Miller's influence.
Yeah.
And when I was in Northern Ireland, I got to know quite well Frank Carson.
Oh, yeah.
And he stole that catchline.
Yes,
it's the way I tell him.
I met him once. Believe it or not, I met him at the top of the BT Tower. And he was lovely like that. It's impossible to be straight with him.
Oh, absolutely.
Everything was a joke.
Yeah.
And
he couldn't stop talking.
He was a charming man. He's a bit like another character that we met only last year. and that's Jimmy Cricket. Jimmy Cricket, he says, come here. That's, again, this intimate style with you and the audience. Come here, here's another one. And so, as you said to your colleague very recently, it lives on. And so do people like this. Here's another person who used to have catchphrases. You'll like this one. This person I brought along today, here he is. Look at that. My goodness me. Now then, ladies and gentlemen of Lewis and elsewhere, who do you think this character is? Now, does Keith know? He should do. Is there a clue? He's a bit strangled at the moment. You're right. I thank Al.
Did he have a daughter, Anthea?
Yes.
Well,
Anthea.
there we go.
Exactly. This is Arthur Askey. Popular during the war in particular.
Very much so.
With a program called High Gang, I think. No, not High Gang. It was called, dear, what was it called? They used to have a flat at the top of Broadcasting House. That was it. And he was there with a man called Richard Murdoch. So it was Arthur
Dickie
Askey.
Murdoch, yes.
Dickie Murdoch, exactly.
Yes.
And that was a very popular show. It started just before the war, probably around May or something, 1939, and went through for about 4 years. And there was even a stage show. It wasn't High Gang. High Gang was B.B. Daniels and Ben Lyon. Yes, and we'll think about it and come back with that. But that's the great Arthur Askey.
Yes. I can remember my aunt. We watched Arthur Askey on Christmas Day doing a show, and in those days, of course, it was all live.
Yes,
and I can remember my aunt saying, quite seriously, Arthur Askey was asked about how he feels about working on Christmas Day, and he said, terribly important that this show, and that he had this Christmas with his family, and that was the whole topic of conversation. What Arthur Askey did on Christmas because he was working.
Absolutely right. I saw, funnily enough, now that is a funny thing. I actually saw Arthur Askey.
Workmate, wasn't it? Playmate.
Hey?
Playmate. That was one of his.
Oh, hello, Playmates. Hello, Playmates.
Yeah, that's right.
Big-hearted Arthur, they call me. Oh, yeah, going back in times. I'm sure this is prompting a few. Bandwagon. It was called Bandwagon. And it was the BBC, and they had the flat at the top, and they had a pet dove and a whole range of things. Now, I saw him in pantomime. Where was that? Yes, we were applauding. Look at that. Isn't that lovely? I saw him in pantomime at the Palladium, except... This is a story of my life sometimes. I went once to see Peter Sellers in a show in London. Guess what? He'd fallen off the stage the night before, didn't appear. So this was Arthur Askey as the Dame in pantomime at the Palladium. Guess what? He didn't turn up. And the trouble was, whoever did take over, it's impossible to take over a character like Arthur Askey, you see. And that's, I don't know why that happens. It's so annoying when it happens. You specifically want to see someone, and for some reason or other, they can't make it. So there he is. I thought you'd like to see him. Lovely character, Arthur Askey.
Absolutely.
We remember him well. And
he was pint-sized, wasn't he?
Oh, yes, he was a very short man.
I remember.
Go on.
He starred in the movie Murder on the Something Express or The Ghost Train. The Ghost Train. He starred in the movie The Ghost Train.
Wow.
And he played the detective in disguise.
Amazing how these things.
Yeah.
Amazing how one thing triggers another one.
Absolutely.
Well, I'll put you away now, Arthur. All right. Yes. They're very nice, you see. And it's probably worth a few pennies, that little character, especially with his hat. That's very nice.
Yes.
And there's while we're on the subject,
where do you find these things? In the lanes in Brighton?
Oh no, mostly in this lovely town of Lewis. Actually, I was watching one of these antique road trips last night, and they were up in Scotland, and then they ended up at auction in Bolton somewhere. It wasn't a bad program, but the trouble is, what I don't like about those programs, people go into these shops and try and knock down the price. So take advantage of the shop seller who's on television. So he can't really say, no, I'm not doing that. So they end up with these alleged bargains. Then they take them to some obscure auction house, this time in Bolton. And there, of course, there's a lack of interest in many of the items. and sometimes they lose quite a lot of money. It seems a strange exercise. And then finally, we've got this, which is Peter Brough and Archie. This is Archie Andrews.
Educating Archie.
Yes, lovely. Yes, he does talk as well some of the time, don't you? Can you say anything, please? I'm not going to do the voice, but is he? Oh, no, he's not. He's. I think he's a bit jammed up. You know, we have trouble on this television station. Whenever I bring things, they don't work. They should work, you see, but there we are. Yes, that's Peter Brough. Because the amazing thing about him, as everybody says, was that he was a ventriloquist on the radio.
Yes.
Which, of course, is a very good place to be a ventriloquist.
Absolutely.
But you can't see
you can't see
he didn't talk like that. No, he didn't. Oh, he had a voice like, oh, Peter Brough, oh, Brough, he used to say. He had his own television and radio series as well. And if I remember rightly, a whole series of comedians, including Max Bygraves, all actually appeared in the same program with him. And there's another man, by the way. Why was Max Bygraves called Max? Max Miller.
Oh, really?
Max Miller. It was exactly.
He named himself after.
Isn't it amazing, these things, you see? People, I mean, if you hadn't watched Mirador, you'd have never known that.
No.
Think the education.
You learn more on Mirador that you can't find anywhere else.
The educational value of this is absolutely beyond measure. I think we should be in touch with the government about this and suggest that this should be available in all schools. I think Keith and I should be available on a screen, I hasten to add. I'm not going around. I'm not going around schools. I did that once upon a time. It was a disaster. It was a disaster because children, then they've got their own interests, haven't they? And they certainly don't want to hear an old git going on about. Oh, I remember them days. Oh, them days. By the way, do you like tomato juice?
I do.
Well, I tell you what, I've got to rush away, everybody. I know you'll be disappointed to hear this. I brought these chaps along. I've got to rush away because you will not believe this. But at home, I am awaiting arrival. I am, seriously. And they said that it would be here in 48 hours. It hasn't arrived yet. I am awaiting arrival of 24 cans of something called Big Tom. And this is a really remarkable, now there's a good plug, sausages, Big Tom, tomato juice. And apparently this can be mixed with something like vodka, obviously.
Oh, a Bloody Mary.
Oh, Bloody Mary, if you excuse the language.
Yes.
So I've got to rush away because...
do you know what a Bloody Caesar is?
No, what is a Bloody Caesar?
A Bloody Caesar is made with tomato juice.
Oh.
And my wife, being Canadian, she loved it. Tomato juice is a mixture of tomato and clam juice.
Oh.
And a Bloody Caesar is. But then the other one, of course, is a Bloody Virgin. And that is pure tomato juice.
Pure tomato juice, unadulterated.
Absolutely.
Well, there we are. No, these tomatoes. I wind up. The only puzzling thing is, why order them? Because I'm not sure you can say this, but I mean, waiting on these things to arrive, and you think, are they going to arrive? Will they ever arrive? And then there's a phone number that nobody ever answers, It's a dodgy business. All this mail order stuff is all very well. But
yes, luckily, the stuff that I have can be left in the mailbox. And I took delivery last week of a tractor.
A tractor?
A tractor.
Oh.
But it's only about that big.
Oh.
And it's to fit on my little N-gauge railway.
Oh.
So there it is. And there's a corrugated cardboard ploughed field.
One
sitting proudly in the middle.
Oh my goodness! A man after my own heart. I've got a little townscape which I can't bring with me, but I add things to that.
Oh yes.
I had a cottage, a lovely cottage, with a woman, a dairymaid, coming out of the door, and I then found a lovely shepherd. A shepherd, one of these dogs, a shepherd.
Yes.
Yeah, a lovely dog sitting there, which is really nice. I tell you what I have got. You mentioned a tractor. I used to sell in Cornwall, and they were very popular in Cornwall because there's a lot of tractors in Cornwall. Here is the news. There are a lot of tractors in Cornwall. Not many people know that. And in fact, we used to sell these tin plate tractors. And I'm going to bring one next week.
Oh, please, yes.
It won't be fitting in with your little
No, but I just like to see it.
Oh, and not only that, this is quite remarkable. I think it was probably made, I suspect, in Europe. I'm not sure. But it has gears and changing the gears.
Ooh.
You can go down from 1 through to 5.
Oh, yes. No, I really want to see it.
And it's got a steering wheel as well.
Yes.
Oh, well. Yes. So I'll bring 1 or 2 little metal toys.
Yes.
You see, viewers, it's a good thing to collect. Be clear about that. But the thing to do, as you obviously have, is to have them nicely available. You should never stash things away.
No. They've got to be there. And actually, when you say you put a little thing, is one of my favorites is a weeping willow tree.
Oh, that's nice.
Yes, and I create a little stream so that it's in a suitable location.
There was an item on television a few days ago, I think, talking about the famous people who have model railways. Yeah. And I think Rod Stewart is one of those people. And a man called George Holland. He's got a model railway as well.
And Huey Green had one.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Really?
Yes.
Did he really? Yeah. I wonder what it is about men. I mean, women don't collect model railways. Now, that's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Well, I mean, little boys, presumably, in the war particularly, I was given a Hornby set, a very modest Hornby set. And little boys they never get Hornby sets to girls, did they?
No, they didn't.
They gave them dolls and things.
Yeah, that's right.
That's how the world has changed. But today, I'm sure the advocates out there would say, girls should have. They should have the whole world. So a tractor next time. Next Wednesday. Something worth looking forward to.
Wonderful.
And I must go home for my look. Could everybody keep their fingers crossed, please? And if my tomato juices do arrive, I will bring a couple of them here.
Oh, yes.
Do you think the management will object?
Well, no. In fact, what I would suggest is that since you appear, as we come up to the yard arm, in fact, the sun is just going over the yard arm now by a couple of minutes.
So it has.
Well, about 15 minutes.
Right.
What we could do is we could get from the management a little smidgen of vodka.
Do you think so?
And we could have a Bloody Mary.
Oh, my goodness. Yes. What do you mean, live?
Absolutely. I mean, we could replicate Dave Allen.
Suddenly, a gloomy world is beginning to brighten up, which is what Mirador is all about. Yeah. What I hope I'm all about on a Wednesday, what Max Miller was about all his blooming life, and what you should be, if you go out there, I tell you what, here's a final thing for you. Here's a final thing. If you don't like tomato juices, don't worry about it. A lot of people don't. Now, this is the other thing to remember, a smile. I'll tell you what, a decent smile. And I'll tell you something even more encouraging as I remembered it. There was a nice lady I was having trouble checking out. Don't even go there, Oh, no, it won't click. Where do I put all this? So a very nice young lady came over called Alice. Her name was, and she was down there. And she said, oh, no, that's all right. She said, oh, I can sort that. She said, don't panic. And I said, don't panic, Captain Mannering. No, I said, don't panic. And she said, and she must have been only about 20, Captain Mannering. In other words, she watched Dad's Army. And I was pleased because there is an argument that young people don't watch things like It Ain't Half Hot. So this was Alice.
That's brilliant.
Credit to Alice.
It's a brilliant series, and it's brilliant that young people watch it.
Absolutely right. And the other one, who I don't think I would make too much of this today, but you're doomed. You're all doomed.
Who's that?
That was the Scottish guy. Brilliant actor. Here we go. All right. Answers on a postcard, please.
Yes.
To this address. Yes. Keith Hayes, Mirador Television, Lewis,
White Hart.
Exactly. Yes. So that's it, everybody.
Absolutely. And if you think we're daft, we are.
Oh,
and join us.
Bonkers.
Being daft is loads of fun.
Yes, I mean, if you're sitting there, wherever you are, whoever you are, anywhere in the world, and say, well, what on earth are they all about? You don't ask that question, do you? I mean, if you keep answering that question, you'll get absolutely nowhere at all. the fact is we're here because we're here because we're here. And I'm going out there and I'm going to smile at the first person I see. And if I get arrested, I'll let you know.
Very well. We shall visit you in jail.
Oh, that's lovely. And then I can
we'll
tell
bring
that
Arthur
joke.
Askew down, and we'll.
And then I can tell that joke. Number 9. That joke, you see. That was a good joke, wasn't it? Lovely. Nice to see you.
Good to see you.
Look after yourself.
Okay. Bye, John.
Goodbye. Toodle pip, everybody. Oh, yeah. Bye. Goodbye.
There we are. Is John Henty and the foolishness of Mirador. I hope we've had an interesting morning for you, and we'll be back. Well, tomorrow you can catch it all again if you missed it today. A recording tomorrow of today's programs, and on Friday we'll be back live again. So we'll see you Friday morning at 8 o'clock. Until then, I think what we'll do is we will say toodle 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 pip, and why not? It's good to say goodbye as well as to say hello, isn't it? Yes. Toodle pip.